Hello, fellow survivors. I am here with a man who needs no introduction in the Long Dark community, but he will get one anyway, because it's the creator of the Long Dark himself, Raphael van Lierop, founder of Hinterland Studios and creative director of the Long Dark. Welcome, Raph.
Thank you, Zach. Thanks for the chance to talk about our favorite game together. And
Yeah.
really, I want to start first by saying how much I personally appreciate, but the whole Long Dark and Hinterland team appreciate all the work you do
Oh.
in the community to like really share thoughtful. I don't want to use the word content because it's so overused, but like thoughtful, all the things that you're creating on your channel about the Long Dark, whether it's, analyzing strategies, gameplay, analyzing lore,
Hmm.
all the things you do. We're fortunate to have a lot of great people in the community, either making things on YouTube or Twitch about the game, and we appreciate all of them, but I especially appreciate the work that you put in and how much thought you put into everything that you create. And it's
Oh.
really, as much as I can say this, I think it's like the thoughtfulness really aligns well with how we also try to think about our work.
Oh, okay.
So it's always really rewarding for us to, I mean, all of it is rewarding, but it's especially nice when someone takes the time to like really put some care and thought into what they're creating around the game. And we do have a lot of fans at Hinterland of everything that you make. In fact, I'm
Oh,
pretty sure when we launched episode 5, because we had given you a little preview build,
yeah.
I think you were certainly one of the team was basically watching various content creators on our launch on our launch day, and I'm sure you were one of the ones that people were watching. So I just wanted to give you a shout out because I probably said that in various places in the community, but I don't think I've ever said it to you personally. I wanted you to
No.
hear it from
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Oh, that's very nice. I always wondered how much is actually watched of my stuff over at your place at Hinterland. But
We have a lot of fan. We have a lot of fans. Yeah, when I mean not and of yours and other creators as well. And I think yeah, we definitely every time we do an update, there's a bunch of people on the team that are, often even when they're still working, they'll have like a window on one of their monitors with streamers. And we even have some people on the team who do routinely like we'll have sort of on a constant cycle. We'll just have long dark stuff in the background. And
yeah, yeah.
and it's actually really interesting. We even I probably shouldn't say this, but we even often discover bugs that we didn't know were in the game just by
Yeah.
like watching other people like encountering things. So yeah, but I really appreciate everything that you make, and I know this conversation is a little bit overdue. I think we'd started talking about maybe doing it a year ago or something.
Something, yeah.
And but it's nice that it's happening now, and hopefully we can do more of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That would be great. It's nice
Yeah.
to be here and there's a time difference, so we're like 9 hours apart, something like
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
no, that's great to talk to you because we were talking over email and stuff for a while. I was a play tester the one time, and then I had the early access for episode 5, and yeah, no, it's great to have you here. And thank you for that. That was very, I didn't expect it. Was very nice to hear. Thank you so much for that.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
we often don't. I think we all, as people who create things and put them into the world, and I'm sure the same is true for you, you often hear the feedback that's not so complimentary, but you don't always hear the feedback that's complimentary. And I think
Oh,
it's nice to also get the positive feedback sometimes, because I think sometimes if you only hear negative stuff, then you start to lose sight of what it is that you're trying to do
yeah.
and why you're doing it. So I think it's important
Mm.
for you, just like for us, that you hear some positive feedback. And I know you do have a lot of fans and you're very popular and people love it and everything, but I want you to know that we at the studio really appreciate the things that you
Oh,
do, and we've enjoyed collaborating with you on some of the things that you've looked at, with us over the years. And again, I hope we can do more of it.
yeah, absolutely. No, that's great.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Mhm.
That's nice to hear, and I look forward to continue collaborating. There's a lot of stuff on the horizon as well, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Maybe we could hop into some topics. I have a list here, but we can just.
Sure.
I thought I'd just start with something quite simple, which is just how does it feel to have finally wrapped up Wintermute, to have episode 5 out, and it's reached the story that's been in development for a long time. How does it feel to actually have it completed?
I mean, I knew you were going to ask me that. And I like thought a lot about what I would say, and now that I'm at this moment, I think it feels quite bittersweet,
Yeah.
is the truth. Yeah, I think this is a story that's been with us as a studio, but with me personally for a long time.
Mm.
And I think the thing that I appreciate most about this moment is the feeling of like living up to promises.
Mm.
So this goes back to a promise that we made in our Kickstarter back in 2013 that we would have 5 episodes in the game and they would be included in the price of the game. And that's a promise that's been very central to many, many decisions that we've made or I've made over the years of what we would prioritize at the studio. And it's always been a real challenge at Hinterland to balance the needs and the the growth of the community and the studio around survival mode and the success of the survival mode, while also wanting to live up to the promise of Wintermute, and which was really how we started the Long Dark. Like even though
Yeah.
survival became this, I know a lot of people have talked about this, and I've talked about it as well. Survival, was Long Dark was sort of kickstarted as a more narrative-centric survival experience. So Wintermute was always meant to be at the heart of the experience of the game. And survival mode, fortunately for us, really took off and has become the lifeblood of the Long Dark, and for many good reasons. But the Wintermute piece has always been important to us. And I think even though it hasn't always been important to all of our players. So in a way, if being able to finally say, look, episode 5 is finished is really like personally feels really important to me to as a goal to say like we finished and we delivered on what was promised.
Mm.
And I think there were a lot of moments over the years where even though I always knew we would deliver in episode 5, I know a lot of our players didn't think we would. A lot of our players would thought we would give up or we wouldn't live up to promises or whatever. So like I feel like it's very important that we live up to the things that we say we're going to do, and that was always something that was kind of weighing on us, I think, as a team and weighing on me personally that we hadn't done that yet. So that's a great relief to say that it's
Yeah.
finished.
Mm.
Um, you know, it's not the end of the Long Dark, so it doesn't feel as much like a final chapter or anything that it might have felt if we hadn't already planned on continuing to work on Long Dark with Black Frost, or if we didn't already have other plans for continuing to work on the current Long Dark game. But certainly, this is the end of a big story, and it's hard for me to say for sure right now, based on how I feel about it, whether we will ever do anything like Wintermute again. So
Mm.
there's an aspect of it that feels a little bit, again, bittersweet because it's like, well, this is the end of a big, long journey. I care a lot about storytelling. I've obviously care a lot about the world of the Long Dark. I've over the years become very connected to the characters in the world that we've shared with our players, and so there's it's sad to feel like you're saying goodbye to them, at least for now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't. Obviously the elephant in the room is how the players have reacted to episode 5, and it hasn't been universally beloved, of course,
No, of
and that's
course.
very hard to see as a conclusion to all these years of work to know that we have players that really are not happy with it. And honestly, it's been very confusing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's been confusing for the team. It's been confusing for me personally. And I think part of it is because we've over the years really come to understand that we have sort of two games in one game, and we have players who really love
Yeah.
survival mode, and we've tried to do everything we can to sort of optimize and improve what the survival mode experience can offer players. And then on Wintermute's side, in a way, like episode 5 is the same thing. It's sort of the most pure version of what a narrative-driven survival story that is the conclusion of the previous 4 episodes
Yeah.
can be.
Mm.
And I think it's been confusing to see some of the response to it, and not just the response, but the hostility in some cases around the
Yeah.
launch. And so that's it's
That must have
hard
been
to feel
hard.
like you're ending on something like that you have worked on for so long, that has mostly been really beloved for so long,
Mm.
to feel like you're ending on a down, on a downward feeling, and a sentiment in the community that's not positive, which is always hard to deal like to face. So yeah, so it's like it's a tough combination of of emotions, and I also personally feel very like responsible for the team, of course, and how they feel about the game. And so, I'm very mindful of maybe what they're reading and seeing,
Yeah.
online and being said about the game. So there's a lot of complexity. It's not a like it's certainly not like a simple experience to finish something like this,
No.
and the emotions around it are pretty, yeah, they're pretty complicated. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I will
so
say
there you go.
that that in my experience anyway is that whenever you have large launches like episode 5, the Tales and what have you, it brings out a lot of people who I guess I could say are not regular players of the Long Dark, or at least not players who are engaged in the community normally. So
Hmm.
once the hype of the launch dies down, what you're left with are the core community, and they tend to be a lot more positive. And if you think about a comparison is something like, say, when Tales was launched,
Hmm.
a lot of people were up in arms. Oh, I couldn't play it the first hour. No one remembers that now if I hadn't said anything,
Hmm.
because a lot of people come out, they're excited for a launch, and then there's some sort of issue or bug or whatever, and then they complain about it. But then those people who are very negative often they leave, they don't play anymore. And the ones who are left playing
Hmm.
saying, "Oh, this is great," then
Hmm.
they appreciate it for what it is. So I guess there's a dichotomy of like you get a mixed bag of people who really enjoy the creation and some who don't. But the ones who don't, like you said, actually to me, is that they often have louder voices, right? And it must be hard to hear all that sometimes. But I will say that I think that over time it stabilizes out, and the recognition that is deserved usually comes out.
Yeah, and I mean, I hope that happens, of course. And I think we've seen that cycle over the years on Long Dark. You
Mm.
mentioned the example of Tales. There have been other examples of things that we launched that, maybe it's actually interesting because we were discussing recently sort of some of the reaction to episode 5, trying to understand kind of where some of the sentiment comes from, and
Mm.
observing like how similar it is actually to the launch of Wintermute initially back in 2017, and kind of how a lot of the players reacted to it then. And it's I want to be really clear, like that. I think there is a lot of criticism out there about the game and about episode 5, even that's fair criticism. And I don't want to sound like I'm dismissing it. I think there is a lot, and there are even have been things that I've read, that I agree with. That
Mm.
I'm like, yeah, I do now that and I think there is a gap, which I think might be hard to, and this isn't an excuse. I just think there's a gap sometimes between, when you're working on something, your understanding of it based on what it's meant to
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
versus someone who's experiencing it for a first time that doesn't have that context, who might feel more bewildered by it.
Mm.
And these are the kinds of things that when you're making survival mode updates, or you're in an early access kind of cycle where you can put things out to your players and get that feedback, and you realize, oh shit, that's not what we meant.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not how we wanted it to go. Let's fix it to be more like what we intended, which is different from putting something out that you intended and having people react to it in a way that's not positive, which is a different kind of problem. It's like, well, some people might just not like episode 5, which is fine. That it's, I don't like every game I play either, right? I don't even, and that's okay. Like, I think hopefully there's parts of Long Dark that people who own it enjoy, whether it's survival or other episodes. And hopefully the parts that they don't enjoy don't mean suddenly that they don't enjoy any of it. But I do think, yeah, it's very difficult to talk about it.
Mm.
And I'm trying to be very, like, while we're talking right now, I have a parallel track in the back of my mind, which is like everything I'm saying, I wonder how it's going to get taken out of
Yeah,
context.
yeah,
I wonder how
yeah.
someone's going to twist these words into something in a forum or whatever and accuse me of something that I didn't mean to say or whatever. So I'm trying to be careful. But I think there's different buckets of feedback that we've seen around episode 5, and some of those buckets I think are more legitimate and are more meaningful to us, and other buckets are not meaningful to
Yeah,
us. And
yeah,
I think when you are, yeah, when you're creating something, like, I think there would be an instinct, and in some cases there's even an expectation that because we changed, we did the redux of episode 1 and 2, that we would change some things about the ending that people weren't happy with. or we would do a redux in episode 5 to like address feedback or whatever. And certainly the bugs that people encountered at launch were not obviously not intended. They were not acceptable. We're not happy with that experience for people. We tried to fix them as quickly as we could. And hopefully the experience of Wintermute episode 5 today is much better than it was when we launched, 3 weeks ago or whatever, a month ago. But there, I, and again, I'm biased, so I'm going to say this as from a specific bias. I think a story needs to be able to exist as it was intended to be. And I think that doesn't mean everybody needs to like it or is going to like it. And there isn't a version where everybody is going to like it. And I think it's not achievable for us to create something that can be, you always hope it will be universally beloved, but it can't always be universally beloved. And I think it needs to be okay sometimes for an ending to not be maybe the way that people were hoping, or even certain plot elements or character elements to not be exactly what people were expecting or hoping. And I think it's all healthy. I think the feedback is all healthy, but it loses that benefit and that sort of healthiness by in the way in which it's shared sometimes. And there tends to be sometimes very strong emotions, sometimes a lot of cruelty behind the feedback.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's not constructive always.
Not always. And I mean, and it's easy to sort of dismiss it as like, it's just, that's what online culture is or whatever. And I think that's something that we've always really taken to heart with The Long Dark over the years that we've built it with the community and sort of had interaction with the community, is that we've always tried to like be different that way. Like, and we've always tried to say, we expect more from our players too. Like, we can make a community where criticism and feedback is welcomed, but that also it's done in a way that's respectful and thoughtful, and that people who are quiet and don't want to be yelled at, have a place to go. And that's to me, that's the hardest thing about the launch right now, is that, and we even see this, like, it's not obviously visible to the users, but like, we can go through Steam comments and look at them, and I can see like, positive posts that people have posted in the forums that they've deleted, like, because they don't want to be, they want to be attacked or accused or whatever of liking something that other people don't like. And I just think that's a bit sad. I think it's unfortunate that there are some environments online where that's, where that happens. And I'm kind of rambling in my response, but it does touch on a lot of these different challenges that we have.
And I can see that. And so what you have experienced also happens on my channel, but obviously to a much smaller scale, because like I would say something like, oh, I really like this part, and then the comments would say, oh, you're just saying that because you know Hinterland, afraid to say. But so I can't say that I necessarily like something, because then I'll just say that, oh, just because you're afraid to say you don't like it. But I don't know if you watched my review. I mean, I had a review video, and there were a lot of things I said I didn't like this or that, and so I'm not afraid to do that. But you get kind of accused of the same thing. I will say though that for me personally, like I see where people are coming from. Me personally, I don't understand. I don't care about launch bugs, because a lot of games being launched have big bugs, and they will be fixed, right? If the game is unplayable, is one thing, but if it's just something, a floating torch or an invisible weapon, who cares? It doesn't change the story. And for me personally, I thought that once you also start looking, I'm not sure if this interview is going to be released before or after my symbolism video. Once you start looking at the characters and the meaning of what they do and the choices they make and the symbols that are present, particularly in episode 5, to me the ending actually makes sense. And I think it's actually a good ending. Also, it's a more interesting ending because you don't get that Will and Astrid hug, a kiss, go on a boat, sail away into the Aurora sunset, and they're happily, because it's interesting to talk about also when it's not something you don't expect. And so I've enjoyed the whole episode 5 experience. I'm not going to sit there and say that I thought it was a flawless episode, anything like that. There were things that could have been
Yeah, I
improved.
won't either.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
But
there
that's
certainly
okay,
are things about it that were not the way that we had hoped they would be, and that's it's totally fair. And
Yeah.
we talked a bit about this, but I think, um, yeah, I mean, what I would just say quickly about that comment would be, I do think that anybody who's been playing Wintermute over the years and has kind of even played survival mode and understands the tone of the world of the Long Dark, like probably shouldn't have been expecting a happy ending.
Right, yeah.
Like there was never going to be the Disney ending of Mackenzie and Astrid, or Will and Astrid, getting together and having like living happily ever after. Like that
Yeah.
was never going to happen.
No.
And we can certainly talk and argue about certain decisions that characters made, and whether people think they should have made a different decision or whatever. But from my perspective, and I think I know, everybody in the game, every character in the story behaved exactly the way that they should,
Yeah.
based on the character that they are and the actions that they've taken before then. And
Mm,
Mackenzie, probably more than anyone, because
mm,
Mackenzie has always been about living up to promises.
yeah.
Everything he does is about that. And the ending is about that too.
Yeah. One thing that also kind of interesting disassociation also is that when you play it, you think like, wow, it's been 5 years or whatever since episode 4, and like we've been here 13 years. But yeah, but for the characters, it's like a week or
Mhm.
something. So you have to remember. At least I had to remind myself that when I played it, also like for the characters, it hasn't been a decade. Astrid hasn't seen. Will and Astrid, it hasn't been 10 years since they saw each other, right?
No, no, no.
You
Yeah, no,
know?
we actually had to, like, when I was writing episode 5, I was actually really worried that I would mess up the timeline,
Oh
because
yeah,
it is complicated with the different things that are happening. For example, like what is Mackenzie doing when Astrid's in episode 3, for example, and she's on her own? And like
yeah,
I actually plotted out the timeline. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up, but I plotted out the timeline, and I'm pretty sure it was something like from the moment they crash to the moment we get that Astrid gets to Perseverance Mills at the end of episode 4 is about 16 days, I believe, when you
mm.
plot it out. And like, of course, players can take longer because they can
Yeah, of
spend
course, yeah, yeah,
people. I've heard people spending like 100 days in Milton in episode 1 and
yeah,
stuff, and I'm like, what? Like, it wasn't meant to be experienced like that. But yeah, if you follow sort of generally what makes sense in terms of when things are happening and how long travel takes and how many days seem to go by, like from story reasons, it's something like more than 2 weeks between the crash and getting to Perseverance Mills. And I think
yeah,
the whole story of including episode 5 is like probably close to 3 weeks when you figure out all the timing,
yeah,
transitions and stuff. So it's not a long time, but it's certainly not a short time, but it's not 10
mm.
years or anything like that. Um, and I think you mentioned the amount of time. I do think the gap between episode 4 and 5 did not help us
Mm.
in terms of like how people would respond, the expectations that they had. And I think this is a way in which the comparison to the Wintermute launch in 2017 is pretty apt in this case, because I think a lot of the reaction then was also to the idea that, like, well, we've been playing this game as a survival sandbox game for a number of years and kind of have our own headcanon about what's going on, and now you're giving us a story that's very different and we don't like it as much. And I feel a little bit of episode 5's response was similar to that. It's like, well, we waited a long time, we kind of already figured out some ideas of what might be happening, and this is maybe not really what we were expecting.
Mm.
And that's fair. I think that's really fair. I think, if we had managed to ship episode 5 earlier than 4 and hadn't taken on some of the other things that we tried to do, like Tales and whatnot in between, we might have had a different response. But I
Yeah,
mean, you can go crazy trying to
yeah. It's what
that
if, and
way. Yeah, there's a lot of what ifs. You just can't know. So yeah,
can I
but yeah,
ask?
it is. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just also ask? It has been listed as 5 episodes for as long as I can remember, and I
Yep.
remember you tweeted to me like 2022 or something. This is when Twitter still
Yeah,
exists.
I haven't been on Twitter for a while, so yeah,
And you
yeah.
said something to the effect of like, "Oh, I've written the script now, and it's way longer than episode 5." And so this is 3 or 4 years ago. Um, so I got the impression it's been in development for a while, and it has the obviously the scripts are written presumably in order, but the overall arc from episode 1 to 5, was that planned more or less from the beginning, or did it change rapidly? Did the tales impact? Like, was there a what are you allowed to say about that?
Well, what I can say is there was the only really big change in the story from basically when we started it to when we finished it was and originally, well, there's two big changes. So when we did our Kickstarter, we were we had much more modest ambitions because we thought our budget would also be much more modest. So my original thinking was we would do a 5 episode story that was, with each episode would be a couple of hours, and the narrative presentation of it would have been much more simplistic. Some of you get a sense of that in the episode 1, like the 2D
Mm,
animations that you have in the opening.
yeah.
That was actually what we were going to do for everything in the story, was going to be along those lines. It ended up being like a ton of work to do those two, so it didn't really save us any
Yeah.
effort. But you can probably see over time, like even between the first release of episode 1 and 2 and the Redux, the original episode 1 and 2 were third person cinematics where you would see Mackenzie and you'd see the character bounce back and forth. Then when we did Redux, we shifted everything to first person, so you never see
Yeah, I
Mackenzie
noticed
or
that.
Astrid except in episode. Yeah, so that was, but so apart from, so then so with Kickstarter we had this aspiration of doing this 5 episode story that would have been about 10 hours, and in the end each of the episodes is almost 10 hours and episode 5 is even longer, so the scope got much bigger,
Mm,
because again, like the initial expectation was that we were going to make a much smaller game, much more with a much more modest budget. The story originally was going to just be Mackenzie, actually, just Mackenzie looking for Astrid. That was going to be the whole story, and you wouldn't play her; you would just play him. And then I decided, I didn't want to make it the stereotypical, like, the knight is looking for the princess kind of story. I wanted to make sure that Astrid was an equal part of the story as much as possible. And we didn't
yeah.
get it perfect because we have Mackenzie in 1 and 2, Astrid in 3, Mackenzie in 4, and then both of them in 5. But my hope was that we would be able to give each of them sort of equal weight in the story so that it wouldn't feel
Mm,
like it was Mackenzie's story, even though we start with him and we end with him.
yeah.
And that was one of the reasons why we ended with him, was because we started with him. So that was probably the addition of the two storylines was the only really major change that occurred, and that was like years and years ago. And then, but besides that, the ending and the like, what would happen? Some of the details obviously have changed, but like the idea of going to Perseverance Mills and what they would do once they got there and what they would discover, and how it would end, even with a bunker and everything else, like that's been in place pretty much from the very beginning.
Okay.
Um, and then in terms of the length, yeah, like how we tend to work is each episode has I call it a scriptment, which is sort of I stole the term from James Cameron. So he has like a document that he does for his films that are kind of like it's a mix of a treatment and a script. So it's like it has dialogue, but it also has a lot of details that you would have in a
Right.
treatment. So you end up with quite a large document. And so we do a similar thing, but obviously written for a game. So there's all the interactive elements are included in that, and it serves as a template or a blueprint in a way for what the episode will become. And obviously, then there's changes as the development goes, because as we're building missions and everything, like we realize things need to, because what looks good on paper doesn't always look good when you translate it to the game, and so there's lots of iteration back and forth. Things change back and get fed back into the scriptment gets updated, new dialogue gets added, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
that's the process really of making an episode. But in terms of the scope, like I just went through all 5 of the scriptments because we're pulling quotes for something that we're making, and I wanted to pull some character quotes from each of them. And the first 3 scriptments are about 80 pages each.
Oh, yeah.
And the episode 4 is I think 120, and episode 5 is 230 or something like that. So it's much, and
That's quite
you don't
big.
have a full sense of, yeah, I mean, it doesn't have the same openness as the previous episodes, and we can certainly talk about that. I know that's been a big topic for the community. So if it had the same ratio of like scriptment to open world kind of gameplay hours, you could say, episode 5 would be like 30 hours,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of course.
So we ended up, which I think if you think about a lot of games that have narratives, it's that are also kind of largely open world or have a more open structure, it's pretty common to have to sort of start to close in on an ending at some point and like start closing off freedoms for the player and choices for the player to try to get to an ending, unless you have a game that has multiple endings, which was
Yeah,
never the plan for
no,
us. So, but yeah, in terms of scope, episode 5 is certainly a lot bigger than anything else we did, and everything in it is 100% bespoke. So, like,
yeah,
episode 4 was the
okay,
first episode we did where the region was built specifically for the episode. The previous three were all built on survival regions.
yeah,
And then episode 5 obviously has a lot of new like world, but also all the bespoke gameplay sections like the train, the mine, even the geothermal section. Like those are all very specific, or like the ending in Perseverance Mills with the fire. Like those were all built, handcrafted specifically for episode 5 to help deliver on that story that we were trying to tell. So it's the first
yeah.
time we've invested so much in creating things that were specifically for the story as opposed to kind of using pieces that already existed in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's episode 5 is massive. There's so many regions that must take ages to make. And I know that I was watching some other content creators. I guess I wouldn't always name them in case people disagree with it, but
Yeah, sure.
some were saying that they actually really liked that the episode 5 was more linear because then it didn't have to do the sort of fetch quest type mechanic that often happens. And when I first encountered things like you find the last corpse in the wilds, you just transport back to Perseverance Mill. I was like, oh, I wasn't ready for that and I didn't like it. But then some others people said, well, actually, I'm really glad that happened, so I didn't have to drag the survivors like in episode 3. So a lot of people actually preferred that they didn't have the survival element because then they can focus on the story. But I think that's a very mixed thing. It's a very personal thing. Some people like it, some people don't. At the end of the day, it's not survival mode. It's a story set in a survival game. Survival mode
Mhm.
is survival mode. So at the end of the day, it doesn't. It's there's no right or wrong answer to it, I guess. But
Yeah, and I think that this isn't 100% the case because certainly there are people who really like the previous episodes that don't seem to have liked episode 5 or enjoyed
mm,
episode 5. But I would say, and this goes back a bit to some of the things we were talking about before, like in terms of how do we interpret sort of the audience sentiment around the episode. It's really hard to know. We definitely need some better ways of extracting that information from our players, because right now it's a lot of like vibes and sentiment that we're trying to pick out of community, and that's not always the best way to go because you are hearing from a smaller cross section, which doesn't mean you should ignore them, but they don't
no,
necessarily represent all your players. I think that generally speaking, people who like, I'll try to say it in a way that won't come back on me at some point. The episode 5 was made for people who like Wintermute.
yeah,
It wasn't made for people who like survival mode. And over the many years that we've worked on The Long Dark, we've heard from many players how much they didn't like Wintermute, how much they wish we wouldn't spend time on it, and how much it wasn't their cup of tea. And that's fine. I have games that I really enjoy the single player modes of and that I don't enjoy the multiplayer modes of, and so I don't play the multiplayer modes of those games. And that's okay. That's a choice. Um, I think that people who didn't ever like Winter Meat were never going to like episode 5,
yeah,
and people who um it's totally understandable if you're someone who really prefers your own story and your own experience and to craft every bit of that experience through your own choices. It 100% makes sense that something like Winter Meat would not be to your tastes.
no,
And I think we can talk a bit about Tales. Like Tales was an experiment to try to see like what it would how would we bring more narrative into the more open world sandbox thing, and certainly a lot of players like that. But you can't really tell a story like Wintermute through Tales the way that we did it in
no,
Tales. It's a very like stripped down, you know, very simplistic story that you can tell much more based on the standard kind of collectibles and things like that, which is not to take anything away from it. Like I really enjoyed it. It was super well done. I'm happy that we did it, and probably it shows us a little bit of a path forward into the future for like Black Frost and other things. It's a different approach. It's definitely a way that a lot of open world games deliver story. But we were trying to do something with Wintermute that was a bit more. I hate to use the word cinematic because it's so overused, but a little bit more of a traditional, like using more traditional visual storytelling methods. And
Yeah.
that's, I think you can, hopefully you can see when you play episode 5 how sort of much the team has invested in that aspect of the experience, like trying to get much better at the character performances, the models, the facial
Yeah.
animation, everything. We tried to really like push the quality further than anything that we had done before. Um,
You
you know,
said something.
well,
You said something like that earlier. You said something to the effect of every episode represents the stage of the studio at the time,
yeah.
and I can tell that the quality of facial animation, that sort of thing, is much better than in, say, episode 1. And I remember there was a time in the past, I can't remember the details, but there was a studio that had a lot of face animators that closed down or something, and you hired some from that studio. I can't remember the exact details, a few years
Oh no,
ago.
that was yeah, that was I that was a long time ago now.
Yeah.
That was after Mass Effect Andromeda shipped. I think it
Oh
was
yeah.
that situation. There was a bunch of issues with the character animation stuff, bugs they had when they launched. And yeah, we they got really hammered for it, if I recall. This
Mm,
is like quite a while ago now, so I might
yeah,
be
that was
getting the
so.
details wrong. But yeah, we
No.
did hire someone from that who had worked on that, on that tech and stuff. And but yeah, it's yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know what
No.
else to say about it.
No, no, it's. I think also if you're talking from a pure production standpoint, I think episode 5 is the best produced episode because it's just so big. Animations are great. The dialogue, all of it's very very well made.
Yeah, and I
And
mean,
yeah,
I don't know if it matters to the anyone kind of watching this, but I think if I think what we tried to do with episode 5 was to really like we knew that we had to answer and close down as many of the threads that we had opened in the previous episodes as possible and try to do it in as satisfying a way as possible. And also we sometimes I think this gets lost a little bit in the conversation about games as they're experienced by players and games as they're experienced by game developers. But
yeah,
like we also have been working on this game for a really long time. We also want to keep pushing ourselves to try new things. We very specifically with episode 5 like pushed ourselves to come up with moments that wouldn't work in core survival gameplay just
yeah,
to give something fresh to the players. And I'm not saying we always got it right, I think there's certainly things that could be improved, and hopefully we'll have a chance to improve on some of those things in future things that we work on. But we very much went into the episode production mindset, you know, with this intention of like, let's try to give our players something that we haven't given them yet. We haven't been
yeah,
able to do before. And I think even when we look back on some of our older work, when we've tried to, I saw a comment, I can't remember from whom, it doesn't really matter. It was like sort of like Hinterland sucks at making action stuff or whatever. And I think, and fair, like, like we don't have the verbs in our game to do like gameplay verbs to do kind of action game kind of stuff. And so then you might argue, like, then don't do it because it's not your strength, and that's fine. But also, like, we don't want to only do the things that we're good at all the time. We want to push ourselves. We want to try to create new experiences for players. We also want to create things that we're excited to create. And when you're the one that is making it, you want to try like challenging novel things. And it's, you know, there's a lot of games that have NPCs moving around the world with you. And I'm not saying we invented that idea clearly, but like for
no,
us to do that, it was a big challenge with the tech that we have, with the world that we have, with with all that kind of stuff. And so some of the story that you get in episode 5 is also a way for us to, you know, contextualize some of these gameplay things that we want to try, so like we didn't have to put a train in episode
no,
5,
no.
right? And in fact, we had different ideas early on about what that section would look like, and it was sort of in a conversation with the team as we went, where we're like, what would be cool? Like we knew we wanted to move and travel somewhere, and then it was through conversation that we decided like let's try a train. It has to be steam because we don't have technology that functions properly.
Exactly. Yeah.
How do we contextualize a weird old steam train? Well, here's why. What do you have to do? Well, you have to, like a lot of the story in a game is trying to like give a purpose for why the player will hopefully do the thing that you're asking them to do in a way that hopefully makes sense to them at the time. And so yeah, I hope that I mean, people are going to feel what they're going to feel. They're going to think what they're going to think. That's fine. There's nothing we can do about that. But the thing that I want people to really understand is there's no bit of episode 5 that wasn't made with a lot of love and,
Mm.
like, craft, and people
Yeah.
cared a lot about it. And if you played it when it was buggy and you had issues or whatever and you had a bad experience, like, I'm very sorry that that was your experience of episode 5. That was not what we wanted for you. But I just don't agree with, and I think it doesn't do a service to the game that we've made or the work that the team has done with people who kind of play some of the
No.
sequences that we tried to make and sort of are very dismissive of them. I think you can like it or not like it, that's fine, but you can't say we're lazy or we didn't work hard at it, we threw it together at the last minute, two people worked on it, blah, 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 like all the negative shit that we see. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the most critical person in the world of the work that we do. I look at some of the stuff that we made and I feel so proud of the team. I know how hard it was to make this stuff. I think we did, again, it's not, nothing's perfect, and I'm not trying to dismiss criticism and all that stuff, but, like, we've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
Like, I think sometimes people, like, talk about the game as though we just woke up yesterday and started making, threw
This
this
is,
video game together with no
yeah.
thought. Like, that's not how it worked. And again, it's fine if you don't like it. That's obviously not what I want for anyone. I would love 100% of everybody who plays the game to love it and think it's the best thing ever.
Mhm.
Um, but that's not possible.
No.
I think Wintermute episode 5 was made for the people who love Wintermute.
Yeah.
And in a way, and I know it sounds a bit like a tautology, but, like, in a way, what I've come to believe over the years in making a game with a really big community that can be very vocal and sometimes, not in a pleasant way, is you're making your game for the people who love it.
Mm.
That's who you're
Yeah.
making it for.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not
Absolutely.
making it for all the people who don't love it, because
No.
you're never going to make them happy. You're making it for the people who end up loving it. Those are the people who are and it's not that the other people don't matter. I think from my perspective, we've given a great place for them to experience the long dark that doesn't involve Wintermute. And it's called survival mode,
Yeah.
and we've put a lot of effort into that as well with the base game or even with Tales to try to expand it. And those are all, in a way, our ways of trying to create something for our players that don't like Wintermute, that they'll have something that they really can enjoy and kind of own as their own story, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I think some of the response to Wintermute feels a little bit kind of weird to me in some cases, because it's sort of like, you don't, it's okay. You have this whole other thing that you clearly prefer anyway.
Yeah.
Just play that. Great.
Yeah. It's like I can relate to it at a lot at a smaller scale as well, because sometimes you get people who, like on my channel, I occasionally get comments like, I love the video, but I wish you weren't talking while you were playing. Yeah, well, that's kind of the whole point of the channel. I narrate everything I do, so I'm sorry, but
Mm.
then it's just not your channel. I'm sorry, so it's you can't please everyone no matter what. And I like what, so this is aimed for people who like Wintermute. I did actually survey a few years ago, and I think it was something like, on my channel anyway, I think like 13% of everyone that played Long Dark only played Wintermute, and they only played it for the story, or they played Wintermute as survival because they could save, sort of thing. So there's definitely a subsection of people who really like Wintermute and who are very invested in the story. Like, I can't wait to see what happens, that sort of thing. And yeah, you're not gonna please everyone, no matter what you do. And yeah, I can imagine it must have been hard to read a lot of these, let's say, mixed opinions. But in the end of the day, it's an experience that now has been crafted, and people either like it or don't. And I agree that there's definitely a lot of effort and time put into it, and that's to be recognized. Personally, I have to say that this is just me, but I think bugs are funny. So when I played the episode, the bugs don't bother me because I know they'll be fixed, and also, like, you can do testing with a dozen people, and then you launch it, and the first thing someone does is like, oh, he's not supposed to go there. And then, you never could have predicted that was going to happen. And if something like a person starts floating, who cares? So I just think they're funny. For me, the only bug that happened that changed something for me was that upon launch, when Will gets rescued by Jeremiah in the house, he says, "Oh, you almost forgot this," and he hands him something, and it was invisible. And I just
Mm.
assumed it was the hard case. And then I was making my symbolism video, and then I went back to capture it, and I was like, oh no, it's the jacket. And then I realized, oh, that actually has big significance on the
Yeah,
story.
different symbolism. Yeah, yeah,
It's actually
yeah,
really, really important. Even what Jeremiah says, that you forgot, is actually really important. And that
yeah.
changed everything. So I was okay. Well, then I started writing some more into my video. So that was the only thing that changed something for me, and that's people that didn't even notice that. But like I
Yeah.
said, that's
Well,
just
you're
my opinion of it, and a lot of people aren't like that. So you're never going to please everyone anyway, you know.
no, I mean, I think you have a very charitable kind of philosophy about bugs and appreciate that. I think what I would like to say about bugs is nobody feels worse about them than we do.
Mm,
And in the team, there's a real palpable sense of like disappointment and dismay when we realize that we didn't catch something, that something went out and we didn't. And we do have a relatively small test team. We do the best we can to cover the game. It is a big game.
mm,
Anything on PC, as you might know, is pretty hard to test because you do encounter a lot of hardware things that you can't always test for in the studio. So you are somewhat dependent on, you're hoping for the best. You test on the common hardware, but there will be situations that you couldn't have accounted for. It's again, I started to say this earlier and I kind of abandoned the thought. Like, it's the way in which testing a sandbox survival game with community can work really well that doesn't work well for story because you can't really pre-release your story and test it with people to make sure it's not buggy, which is interestingly exactly how we ended up with survival mode to begin with, which is
yeah.
we were working on story mode and we realized like, hey, we need something to get feedback from players. They don't want to play the story early, so let's create this sandbox for them to
Mm,
test things in, and then that became a whole other thing. But yeah, I would say I think it's important. I really want people that end up watching this to understand from our perspective. Like, I think sometimes there can be a sentiment, and maybe this comes from thinking about bigger studios than Hinterland. Maybe big corporate game developers have a feeling of not caring about these things, but like we care a lot about it. We're all craftspeople at Hinterland. Every single person in the team cares about it. Doesn't matter what role they have. Every single person at Hinterland cares about the player
yeah.
experience, and every time we have bugs and things like that, it hurts us because we really don't want that to be the experience. And I think every big release for us comes with that same it's that same hopefulness about like, this is going to be the one that lands and there's no issues. And then of course there's always issues, and there's that feeling of like, shit,
Yeah.
we didn't catch them all. But I am appreciative of people who can maybe look past them or say, hey, maybe I'll wait a couple weeks and come back when it's hot fixed and then
Yeah,
try
some
it
people do
again.
that. Yeah.
Some people do that, but I also totally think it's fair if people are upset about them and they want to give us a negative review, or they want to whatever. If they want to criticize us for having bugs, like that's fair play. Like, there shouldn't be, ideally there shouldn't be any bugs in the game. That's what we would prefer. That's what we aim for. And I'm not trying to make excuses. I just think it is very hard to do that.
Mm,
I don't think we've ever released anything that didn't have some issues. And it wasn't for lack of testing or lack of care or lack of effort
yeah.
or any of those things. It was just because that sometimes, you just can't catch them all.
Yeah.
Especially with a game like this that we've been updating and fixing for 13 years, and there's still bugs. There's probably more bugs now than there were when we started.
Because it's bigger, you know.
It's
Yeah,
bigger.
but
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
I will say to the viewers that this is my opinion, but bugs to me are just funny because also you have to think of it as if you play a game and then it's hot fixed, say 5 days later, you have 5 days to get a unique experience you're never going to get again. And
That's true.
you're not going to be able to see the invisible gun or the floating cow in the sky or whatever it
Or
is.
wonder what
Uh,
Jeremiah was passing
what
Mackenzie when
was
he
he
said that. Yeah,
passing? Yeah, what was that
yeah,
about?
yeah.
You're not going to see. Like, the thing of No Man's Sky release that was just abominable, and then now it's a fantastic game. Yeah, yeah. So, but anyway, it is what it is. But for me, I didn't mind it at all. But yeah, except for the hard case thing, I guess. But before we like maybe move on to other things, I have to ask one question. It's like probably the most asked question on my channel, which is probably the most asked question for Hinterland and you too, which is this. I'm not sure you're allowed to talk about it, which is any of this going to be added to survival mode? You know, the maps and stuff. I know you have plans about that you're going to release later, so you're free to say pass. But do you have any thoughts on that? Are you allowed to share?
Yeah, I mean, so firstly, I want to say there was a lot of um, there was a lot of people asking us about that before we launched episode 5, kind of
Mm.
in the lead up to it, and we tried to say to them like, you know, we we know that this has been the pattern in the past with the episodes that we've made before, and I touched on it earlier when I said like, episode 1 to 3 obviously were built on existing survival regions, and then episode 4 was something new, and but we also built it knowing that we were going to put it into survival. So we made some decisions about the Blackrock region, knowing that it was going to end up in survival. And with
Yeah.
episode 5, we made a bunch of decisions specifically about the story, knowing that it would make it harder for those areas to be usable or logical even in survival,
Mm.
because as you know, the world in episode 5 is not necessarily interconnected in the way that the other regions are in the rest of
Yeah.
the world.
Mm.
And so, and then we have, I assume you're gonna have spoiler tags on this video,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I
Yeah,
can have an introduction where I say it.
yeah. So like, you see the state of Perseverance Mills at the end of episode 5, right? So like that doesn't mean we couldn't put a version of Perseverance Mills in episode 5, but it's not going to be the version that people probably are thinking, because it's not there anymore, at least not in the state it was when you start. So like
No.
there were things that we knew about the episode that would have an impact on how suitable some parts of it would be for survival. And we tried to talk about that with people without spoiling it, and sort of ask people, so just trust us, it's not going to be that straightforward, but we'll do the best we can. And I think some people had weird reactions to that, but like I do think generally now that the episode is out, people can understand a bit better why we said that. Um, I I can say that we want to put as much of episode 5 into survival as makes sense
Mm.
for the game. So things that
Yeah.
work well for survival that won't require like a complete redo,
Yeah.
because there is always work to, we never can put something straight from story into survival or vice versa. Like there's at the very least we have to do a full resource pass on everything. We have to basically, there's a lot of design work that goes into making something suitable for survival mode. There's a lot of AI
Mm.
tuning. There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen. So it doesn't come for free. And I think sometimes people
No.
imagine, like why don't they just throw it in there? But it's there's quite a lot of work that goes into it. So we always have to balance it against other things that we're doing. And then of course there will be some things that just maybe logically don't make sense. And there's some things that um, and this is a harder one to talk about, I think, because there there could be things that we don't want to put in for, and this is sort of a weird way of saying it, but like out of respect for our own story, our characters in the story, like
Mm.
we don't want to include certain things because they don't belong in survival mode. They
Right.
belong in Wintermute. That's where they exist. And if you
Yeah.
want to experience them, you should go experience them there. So, and I know that sort of pushes against sometimes people's sentiment about like, well, it's my game, I should play it the way I want, and if you don't do it, we'll mod it anyway, and those kinds of conversations that happen. But I do think we try always to, and again, I know this is a word that not everybody loves, but like we try to have a vision for what it is that we're trying to give to our players. We have an intention behind it. We're not just making things to service like what people ask for in the community. Like we actually are making something that we have an idea of that we want to make. And so sometimes that also comes with some aspects of it are like, well, these things don't belong, in other parts of the game. So that's pretty long-winded. I would say for sure we will find a way to bring many things from episode 5 back into survival. They will be the right things. They might not always be all the things that people are hoping for. And if anything, I don't know exactly how we'll do this, but I I and I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I really, yeah, maybe I shouldn't say it. I think it's going to come back on me. I'm not going to say
Then
it.
don't
I'm not going to
say
say it. No, I won't say it. I won't say it.
it.
But yeah, I do really want to bring like to connect those two things as much as we can. It's just it's not. as straightforward as it might seem on the surface.
Yeah,
And some of the gameplay things that we included, like the crank lamp or the shotgun or whatever, like it's not
yeah,
like we didn't think about like, oh yeah, people are going to ask for this in survival.
of course.
And we'll see how we can get them in there and how we want to tune them if we do, et cetera, et cetera. Like, but yeah, we haven't made the final decisions,
Yeah.
and as soon as we do, we'll like let the community know, and that will be stuff that kind of gets worked on in addition to various other things that we're working on that we haven't really shared at the moment.
Yeah, and I can guarantee you that if you add the train to survival mode and add some sort of Death Stranding repair mechanic to fix the tracks, it will be like half of them will love it, half will hate it, and the others will mod it, you know. So it's like, you know, so it's not gonna be, you know, so no matter what you do, and it's gonna be. That's actually something I wanted to ask you, but that we can maybe come back to. But that was this whole thing is probably very hard to balance. Like, what do you add? How do you add it? Do you change it? You know, because it's hard to keep it sort of within the balance or realm of what's stable in survival mode as well. So that must be a very
Mhm.
hard thing to do, I imagine, to figure out what goes into survival mode, not just from Wintermute, but in general. I mean, that must be a very hard decision, I imagine.
I
Otherwise, you
mean,
know,
we do put a lot of thought into it. You know, you don't want to introduce things that really imbalance the game or feel out of place or whatever. I think even you could probably see that with Tails.
mm,
You know, even trying to plan a whole expansion for survival mode and trying to also balance between knowing that some players would have certain things and some players wouldn't. You know, there's a lot of planning and you know, complex spreadsheets that we have to put
yeah,
together to figure out
yeah,
how everything's going to connect. And yeah, there is a lot of thought that gets put into it. And sometimes, you know, I don't think we always get it right either. And I think the tuning and balancing of the game is sort of like an ongoing
mm,
process, especially because as the game grows and new things are added, you have to rethink a lot of things that exist already. You have to think about having new players that are, you know, we always try to think about someone who's starting the long dark today and someone who started the long dark 10 years ago,
yeah, yeah.
and you have to make an experience that's good for both of them,
Mm,
you know. And that's sometimes the challenge is, and then you have some other like interesting outliers within the player community, like the interloper players, for example, are their whole own little culture
yeah,
subculture. And you know, and when you have, you know, we have millions of players, so you have, you know, we have like a large size city of people playing the long dark who own the
mm,
long dark. And so you have to think within that city, there's different neighborhoods of people that have different tastes, you know. And so
yeah, yeah,
you're always trying to make things, and sometimes, you know, like Tails is a good example of this. When we first launched Tails, the first Tale, we explicitly thought, you know, let's just make it for all the XP modes, but not for Interloper, because Interloper
yeah,
is going to be so hard. It will be very difficult for there to be, because all the rewards of the Tales were like gameplay tools.
yeah,
And a lot of the gameplay tools were things that don't work in Interloper.
yeah. Rifle
So
holster, for example.
yeah, so they don't have any value. So we're like, well, why would people want to go through this long, sort of challenging story between these different tales if at the end they're not going to get anything that
Oh,
they can
trust me.
use? Well, I'm sure you've heard about this and talked about it, right? So, and so then we thought, we thought this is a valid choice, because
Mm,
if you're already an interloper player, you already kind of have, in a way, sort of selected your own neighborhood. You live over here in this neighborhood. These are the things that you like. The things that we're making are for this neighborhood over here. So you probably won't care if you don't use them because they're not meant for you. And then of course you launch it and you're like, oh shit, all these interloper players also want to have this thing, even if they don't get any rewards for it. They don't want to feel left out of the chance to participate in that story that's getting shared. And so, you know, I think it's challenging, of course. It's
yeah.
a big organic thing. You know, I think we've got a lot of players. There's a lot of different segments within those players that have different tastes. Again, you have people who've been playing for a long time, people who playing a short time, people who care only about Wintermute, people who care only about story or survival rather, people who play Pilgrim, people who play Misery. You've got all the combinations of all
Mm.
the different, you know, taste clusters, if we use the Netflix, you know, term for it. And you're trying to make an experience that works for all of them. You
Mm,
just maybe aren't always trying to make it for all of them at the same time,
No,
you
no.
know, and that I think that's the challenge too with, and I always really appreciate, you know, when we launch something, maybe it's a survival update with a certain feature, and you see people saying, I will never use that,
Mm.
but I'm happy that it got added because I can see how for other people it will be fun
Yeah.
or interesting or whatever.
Mm.
I think whenever I see those comments, I'm like, I love this person so much because this is exactly the what we hope for. Because there's no way that every single thing we make can be appealing to every single player and all the different tastes that they have.
Yeah.
And if you try to do that, all you end up with is this really watered down experience that doesn't really do anything for anybody. What is better is if you can, as a developer and and for the game, the health of the game is if you can make sometimes a bit more extreme choices about
Mm.
something that will only appeal to a certain group, like the creation of Interloper to begin with.
Yeah, quite, yeah.
We always knew that wouldn't, if all we thought about was what can we make that's going to be appealing to all our players, we wouldn't have put Interloper in the
No,
game,
of course not. No,
right?
it's
So,
yeah, no, it's
yeah.
what you just said, like the spray can was an example of that for me. When that was added, I remember saying to myself, I don't think I'll ever use this, but I can totally see the appeal of someone
Mhm.
who's less experienced with the maps, would absolutely
Yeah.
use this, say, there's a wolf in this area, danger, I've looted this house, etc. You know, but once you know it, you don't need it, but you got to see it from different perspectives. And the segue now a bit into survival mode and other things now. But if you want to backtrack to
Sure.
episode 5, you just do that. But
Okay.
I wanted to, I wanted to say that I always found that impressive, the balance of addition of content. So when you added Tales, I don't know if you watched any of my like campfire videos and all that stuff, but I said that before Tales was launched, I said if the game wasn't updated from this point on, it would still be a 10 out of 10. It's a really great game. And I had this little fear that you'll add something that will now break it, a machine gun, say, you know, and then, you know, and then I was really impressed that over that 2 year journey that was Tales, everything was kind of fit very well into the world that was the Long Dark, of the mechanics that already existed, and it felt like a natural, or like you said, like organic fit into it. So when things were added, like new plants, new regions, new animals, and even some things like the camera, you know, it doesn't do anything, but it's an aesthetic experience. And all of this, I thought, so every time something was added, with one or two minor exceptions, I always thought like, wow, this actually feels like it should have always been in the game, that sort of thing. And I have to just say that to Hinterland in general, because obviously it's a team effort, I think it's a fantastic effort to create and balance survival mode with all the stuff that's been added over the years, because it takes so little to add the wrong thing that suddenly now it's a whole new game. And now there is you can get new Astrid skins that's paid for, where she now wears something else or whatever cosmetics. And
By the way, we didn't add that. I have to say that because someone's going to hear that soundbite and they're going to be like, "What do you mean they added Astrid to cosmetics?"
imagine that was the case. That's never gonna happen. That's not a Hinterland thing. I
No.
know that now. So I have to just really, it's amazing how survival mode has been crafted over the years, and just constantly is an organic, sort of a stable state. Obviously, some things were modified here and there after release, but generally, I think of a great example. Sorry, now I'm rambling here, but safe house mode is a great example, right?
Mm,
Because one thing the Long Dark always was kind of prideful of is it's not a base building game, which is
mhm,
great. I really like that. You can't build your own cabin. There is a mod where you can do that, of course there is, but
mhm,
but it's not that. And then when you add safe house mode, you have this fear that like, okay, now it is a base building game. You can build a cabin, you know, wherever on the top of the summit, for example. But then
mhm,
it isn't that. What it just is you move stuff around inside an interior that already exists, and you just
mhm.
make it more your home, and you make more storage or a better bed. And people really, really like it. I think it's that has, as far as I've the impressions I have, safe house mode is or safe customization is like a highly successful addition to the game. But I still would say it's not the base building game. See what I mean? So that's something
Yeah,
that
no,
could
for
have
sure.
easily broken, not broken, but it could have easily caused a new identity for the game when it didn't.
Mhm.
And I have to add, that's very impressive, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, thank you for that, and I'm glad that that's been your experience of it. I would say that we put a lot of thought into everything that we make, so it's nice to hear that it works out for a lot of people. And we try not to break our own game if we can avoid it. I think that you touched on safe house customization and the camera, which are two, to me, they're two really interesting. If you think about Tails in general, all the things we added in Tails, you can almost start to see a little bit of what I was saying before about sort of having different taste groups or clusters of players that like different things. And
Mm,
in the architecture of something like Tails, when you're planning on a roadmap, like all the features and content that you're going to produce, and we had a plan from the very beginning. It took us a lot longer than we thought, but we decided up front these are the things that we're going to add over the course of this expansion. Um, you are making things with certain types of players in mind.
yeah.
And and for me, the camera and safe house customization are both about player expression.
Yes. Yeah.
And player expression, like a lot of games, a lot of survival games, and any game that has a sort of a literal base building system, like you were referring to, a lot of that gameplay is really about self-expression. It's about
Mm,
I want to make a thing that belongs to me that I made with my own creativity in the world. And of course, in a game like Long Dark, it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense to the game that we've built. But we always knew, it's. I think of it as the same way that I think about the journal, even some to
yeah.
some
The
smaller degree,
journal.
the spray cans. Like the spray can has a gameplay value as well, but these are things that let you leave your mark on the world in some way, your own expression of your own creative senses, and the camera as well. It's like I get to capture something in the world that I care about, and I can then keep it with me, and put a frame on it and hang it up in one of my favorite places. And
Yeah.
that's like a creative thing that I can do in the long dark that it doesn't have anything to do with survival. It's not about
No.
whether you live longer, if you're less hungry or any of the normal things. It's really about the player and the psychology of how the player, and you'll
Mm.
appreciate this because you have an understanding of psychology. Like it's something that the player really has more direct ownership of, and it's part of the way that they express themselves in the
Yeah.
world. And I think that's really
Mm.
important when
Okay.
games
So.
let you do that. And some games let you do it in very simple ways, like I shoot a gun and I see a little mark that the bullet left behind. That's my expression in the world. I had an impact. Literally, I had an impact on the world. And in our case, it's sometimes that, but also these other more complex systems that let you have a sense of impact or change or like effect on the world. And I think that's really, really important in terms of player psychology and keeping
Mm.
people invested.
Yeah.
And it's another way in which something that's more narrative driven has different goals. It's like you don't care as much about player expression in something that's more narrative because narrative is about following a story to the conclusion and wanting to know what happens. In survival, it's not about that. In survival, it's about how long can I survive for? How can I optimize my own survival opportunities? How can I create resilience for myself as a survivor so that I can recover from bad things that happen to me? And then also this idea of like being in the world for many, many days or hundreds of days and getting bored and what do I do? And having to be self-directed in your goals and
Yeah.
objective making. And then this idea again, I think that's really what Safe House customization did for the game was give it that, give players that opportunity to add a whole bunch of busy work essentially that was like their own self-directed expression of their own creative values. And I love that we added it, and I think we loved when we put it in, we loved it so much and saw so much how it would satisfy some aspect of player psychology that was hard to fulfill in the rest of the game the way that it
Yeah.
was built. We put it in the base game. It was supposed to be locked into the Tails
Yeah.
as one of the Tails features. And we said this is too good and too meaningful for all of our players. We shouldn't put it only over here. We need to give it to everybody.
Yeah.
And so, the camera's another example. It's obviously a smaller example, but it's the same thing. It's like I can give myself the objective of like going through the world and trying to find vistas or like interesting scenes, just like photographers do, and memorializing them in some way. And I can put my own notes on the back. And so I find those systems are really fun to work with when you have a foundation
Mm.
of a very complex kind of survival simulation already. And I think we try to find opportunities here and there whenever, as long as it feels organic to the game, to also give that opportunity to players because that is a kind of archetype of player that's different from the
Yeah.
interloper player in some
Yeah.
way because someone that we care about that player too, so I think it's a good example.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at the end of the day, I always say you should play this game how you want. I have a video, I'm not sure if you've seen it, which was like 5 tips, no, 5 strategies or something like that for the long dark. And number one was that you should just play the game however you want to play it. Like if you're still alive, then you're playing it the right way.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
yeah.
So that's all there is to it. And sometimes when I play, people sometimes praise me, oh, you're a good player, or whatever. And sometimes people say, well, why are you doing it that way? That's not the most optimal way of doing it. Yeah, but that's not how I play it. So
Yeah.
you got to play it the way you want to. And you touched on something I'm just going to mention for you if you don't know it. So this whole thing about narrative, because you had a conference talk that I've forgotten the name of now, but I think it was 2 years ago, where you talked a lot about player narrative versus authored narrative, and that Wintermute was kind of the origin of the Long Dark, then they kind of built in the survivor mode. And I can recommend people watch that if you're interested. I'll put a link in the description if I remember the name of it, but you know what I'm talking about. That was a really
Yeah,
good talk you
It was a
did.
GDC talk I did
GDC,
like
that's
maybe
it. That was
six
a
or seven
really
years
good
ago.
talk.
Yeah, yeah.
Really interesting to
Thank you.
hear about the difference between the story. You said something to the effect of like in survival mode, the stories that people have are not made by the studio, but you set up the world for those stories to happen. Because
Hmm.
you have the world and the blizzard, and then it's a cabin that people stumble upon, but that story is their own. And actually, in my Discord, I have a room called the Survivor's Diary, where people can just write things that happened. And that was initially just me saying, "Oh, I didn't record, but this happened." But then I said, "Why don't you share?" And then people started saying, "Oh yeah, I got lost in the blizzard. I 1% health, and then there's a cabin that showed up. Oh, I was saved." So,
Yeah,
so this whole
yeah.
immersive experience, and that's what I think is the beauty of the Long Dark. That it's an immersion experience that you, or in survival mode anyway, where you become part of the world. You're the only person in the world, ignoring Sutherland, I guess, and it's somewhere you kind of live in, and therefore there's no real wrong way to play it. You just play it however you want, and the game does a fantastic job setting this up, even to the extent that there isn't a lot of tutorials, because there wouldn't be if you were in there anyway, right? So that's
Hmm.
one of the big strengths, I think, of the Long Dark, that it creates a world that's very immersive, allows for a lot of exploration and player reflection on how you approach living in the world, and there isn't a wrong way to do it. Arguably, even if you die, you didn't do it wrong, because you probably learned something from dying. so so that's one of the
Absolutely.
beauty of it.
Yeah, and I probably said this in that talk, and I know I've said it in other places too. Like, I think sometimes there's an impression that because we've put time into Wintermute and we've, invested resources in it and tried to tell that story, that we think, that's the real story and the
Mm.
survival mode story isn't the real story. And that's 100% not the case. I think I know because I'm also a player,
Yeah.
of my game and other people's games. I know how rewarding it is and how much of investment if there's a well-made world that you really invest your emotion into because you care about what's going on there, the moment to moment experience of being in that world and the little stories that occur from the interaction of game systems, which is the player story, is always going to be so much more important to you than anything the game authors can ever tell
Mm.
you. And I have the same experience in the Long Dark. I also have the same experience playing, like I probably talked not with you, but I often talk about my love of Stalker 2.
Mm.
I recently, like after many, many years, like fired up a 4-year-old save and finished RDR2. Also a fantastic game. Like the, I 100% agree that the survival mode story, which is the player's story, is always going to be more powerful than the story that we can tell.
Right.
The story that we can tell is there to help explain and present our, not our version, but our the world essentially. Like these are the characters, this is what's happening. And in a lot of settings it wouldn't be important to do that, but in our case it's like, well, we have to explain what we have to contextualize what's going on in the world, and this is the story in which we're, through which we're doing that. And hopefully people get the ideal version is people love Wintermute and they care about the world more because they understand more about
Mm,
the characters who live there and some of the things that they're going through, and they bring that interest and that care into their own experience of
yeah.
playing survival mode. And then the whole thing becomes even more enriched because Wintermute doesn't take anything away from you. It doesn't
No.
take away your survival story. It just gives you more context
Mm,
than maybe you would get in the game, where things are intentionally more open-ended, more vague. So,
yeah.
but yeah, I 100% believe that the player story is always going to be the more powerful one, and it makes sense. You're going to be more invested in your own situation than anything that we can tell you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there's a lot of personal investment also because of things like permadeath. There's an
Yeah, of
article,
course.
there's a research article, a great title. It's called something like "Permadeath. It's all fun and games until someone dies," or something like that. And when basically the gist of it was that when you have permadeath, people get a lot more invested because it feels more real as opposed to
Yeah, your
just like
choices have consequences, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
everything is a consequence. You can't just backtrack or anything like that. But yeah, no, that's all great. And while we're on this topic, let's do. There's a lot of stuff I can ask, but this light thing you mentioned about you also are a player, and some of my viewers and patrons wanted me to ask you, like, if you when you play the Long Dark, does it feel too much like work, or do you enjoy playing it? And when you do play it, what do you play? What is your favorite region? Do you have a moment that was really special to you that happened, and that sort of thing? Anything there you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think, I certainly don't have the most hours in the Long Dark of any player, but I think if I look at my Steam account, I have certainly over 1,500, maybe close to 2,000 hours.
Mm.
And most of those hours have been like 10 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't, and this is it's two things. It's one, being a game developer and how much time you really have to play games while you're working on them full time. And then there's also um the way you experience your own work. And I think even something more narrative like Wintermute, like I will have played through, like I played through episode 5 many times. I've played it out in different, like out of order. I played like every single cinematic moment I looked at probably 30, 40 times, often out of order. Like you don't experience it the same way the player does the first time through. You see all the versions of it, all the bad mistakes, all the, everything. You have all of those things in your head at the same time. So you can never experience something for the first time as a player when you make it.
No,
And the
no,
truth is that I don't think I've ever been able to go back and play anything that I've made.
no.
Like once it was done, I've never, like none of the games I shipped before I worked at the start at Hinterland, even the episodes at Hinterland, like I've never gone back and played them after I've made them because you can't experience them anymore as a with fresh eyes. Um,
No.
that said, um yeah, and again, for survival, it's the same thing. Like often when I'm playing and it's to test something, it's like, oh, here I have 20 minutes to go in and try a new feature or whatever, make sure it's like working the way we intended, or I help to find bugs or like whatever. So it's definitely not going to ever be the same experience as it is for the player. I'm trying to think about the last time I really sat down and had a proper long session of survival mode, and it's been a
Mm,
while.
yeah.
So I don't, yeah. But I mean, I always my answers about my favorite places and things like that are really driven by nostalgia,
Yeah.
right? Like I always love Mystery Lake.
Of
I just
course.
always do. I always feel it always feels like coming home. It
Yeah.
always feels like coming home for me. And if there's any place that I've spent, I've spent more time in Mystery Lake than I have in my own house that I live in right now. Like, so it feels really like home, and all, if you can imagine all the stories of the creation of the Long Dark over the years, all the places we've been, all the studios we've had, all the people that have worked on it, some of that aren't working on it anymore, my own kids growing up, my own
Yeah.
relationship with my wife, like all my own story, everything is tied up in that place.
Yeah.
So I see all of it when I go there. I don't experience it only as a game like you. I experience it as like 13 years of my life.
Yeah.
So it's never going to be exactly the same.
No.
But and I think, but yeah, I think Mystery Lake is always special. Um, I really like, I really like a lot of the new places we added in episode five. Partly because they're new, so they feel fresh. But
Mm.
there's some very cool locations. Like I'm really happy with how the cargo ship turned out. It's super spooky, and
Yeah, cargo
I think
ship's
the team
great.
did a great job with that.
Mm.
I really enjoyed. We've done a lot of mine, so it was a question about whether we could do something that would feel fresh or whatever. And I really like the way it turned out. Yeah, I just Perseverance Mills is great. It feels exactly like how I imagined it when I started the game, 13 years ago. And yeah, I mean, there's so many places to live. I'm not trying to dodge the question. I think,
No, I get you. I get it.
I will say the one thing that surprised me when working on episode five was how much I enjoyed the train.
No, yeah, a lot of people love the train. It's like
Yeah,
also it's the one moment in the whole episode where there's like joyfulness, really.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. And that's exactly what I felt like, even in the earlier versions when it was really rough and before any of the stuff, like certainly no dialogue was there, like nothing, it was just very basic. It just felt, yeah, it just felt so different and new. And the idea of going somewhere, feeling like you're traveling somewhere, like you're always traveling somewhere in the long dark, but you always do it on foot. So like this is the first time where you felt like you were this, and there's something very romantic about trains. I'm sure
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
people think that, but there's just something about that. And I think also in Canada, like so much of our country and our history of our country is tied up in the railroad and
yeah,
trains, like connecting the country. Like we have such a big country, like the connection, the whole country being connected by rail. Like I just think there's a lot there for us and for me particularly. I just found it so enjoyable in a way that I mean, you mentioned joy too. Like it felt joyful in a way that we don't often let ourselves feel in when
yeah,
we're making the long dark. It's true. We don't often prioritize joyfulness as a emotion in our player. We prioritize challenge and trying to make things compelling and having interesting trade-offs and having to make tough choices. And those are the ideas that have driven the long dark over all the years. But there's very few things in the game that were made specifically to try to elicit some sense of joyfulness from the player, and the train is definitely one of them.
yeah.
I don't, the frontier cooking system was sort of another one where we tried to play a little bit with it. You can see that in the recipes and things, which don't feel very serious sometimes. And it was kind of like, well, if all
Oh,
you do
yeah,
is survive all day and you never have any fun, like what's the point?
yeah,
You need to have something to live for, right? And I mean, I'm not saying you should live for food, but like there has to be something in the world that you care about. The same thing we talked about the safe house customization, like that sense of coming home to a place that I made that has my little touches, and I love seeing, it's so fun to see some things that people do with their safe houses and like stacking TVs and collecting all the pancake art and putting it in one place. And
yeah.
I love that. It's so fun to see that, and yeah, so, but as far as answering your question, like, is there a specific place? I do feel like Mystery Lake and
Mm.
Trappers especially always feels like coming home.
Yeah, Trappist
Always.
is historic, you know.
Yeah.
But let me ask one thing that is I noticed at the end of episode five, there's like a disclaimer, and you said something to the effect of like you look forward to continuing the journey with more updates and DLCs and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
I'm not gonna ask you to explain exactly what that means, but maybe you could talk in general about something like what you're at liberty to say about what does the future have in store going forward now that this is out, episode five is out. Like, why did that was that message put there, for example, and what can you say
I
about the
think,
plans?
yeah, I think so. The first part of the message was to thank the community, the player community that's been part of this all the way through.
Mm.
Um, I think you know, I made a choice to announce Black Frost, early, and I had reasons for that. That makes sense to me and made sense to me. And I think, but as a result, I think that a lot of players mistakenly interpreted that as a way of that we were saying we were finished with the Long Dark and it
Right,
wasn't
yeah.
a priority anymore. And so, if anybody who was kind of paying attention when we did announce Black Frost, and I had like I shared sort of a letter with our players, and I mentioned in there like this is not the end of the long dark. Like we still will continue to to build on this game. And I was trying to remind people of that in that not so much disclaimer, but kind of like that player thanks kind of message to say there's going to be more of this. Like I understand that it's a little bit of a conflicting message. I understand because on one
Mhm.
hand we're trying to say, look, we've delivered on what we said we were going to deliver. There have been a lot of years where I would have argued like survival mode has been done for a while. We've just been continuing to update it for free because we're still working on Wintermute and we haven't finished that. So in a lot of ways, you could argue if you don't care about Wintermute but you love survival, well, survival got tons of extra work and effort put towards it while we were trying to keep, the episodes in development so that players wouldn't feel like we had abandoned the game while we were still working on the episode. So I think it was really important to me and to us as a studio that people understood that we've delivered on our promises. So please, now you should hopefully you can feel like we've done what we said we were going to do, and there's no longer this sense of like, but how come Hinterland hasn't delivered? They haven't delivered. They haven't delivered. Like
Yeah.
we feel like we've been delivering the whole time, right?
Mm.
But at least it's hard to have sort of an inflection point with a game like this where you can say like, okay, this is done now because we're always working on it. But we wanted to say on one hand like this is finished, but also it's not over. So this part is done, but not the whole thing. And there's still lots of things that we would like to do with the game. And I think the second part of it is, The Long Dark is still a very vibrant, successful game for Hinterland. We have no reason to stop working on it as long as players still want to play it and people still want to buy it. And we're in a world, with the games industry particularly is in a really challenging place right now. And one of the big challenges that we all have as studios is we're often competing with our own games. Like you're trying to put things into the market and get attention for them when a lot of people are playing the things that they have been playing for the last 10 years. And so we what I wanted to avoid with finishing this part of Long Dark was to create this sense that there'd be some big gap in between the end of
Mm.
Wintermute or whatever and the beginning of Black
I
Frost,
see. Yeah.
right? Because I want people to keep playing and I want them to know that we still see so many opportunities to keep growing the Long Dark. And honestly, if there was a way to do it that made any kind of business sense whatsoever, and I haven't been able to figure it out yet because I don't think it exists, I would almost rather just like have Black Frost be sort of just like a continuation of the Long Dark and sort of a line, so we could take all our players with us. But like we need to make money, so we need to
Yeah.
sell, a game, and of course it's different technology and all kinds of other things. So, but yeah, I think the message was really to try to say we know that some of you will feel sad about the end of this story, and we don't want you to feel like this is the end of the Long Dark. It's just the end of Wintermute, and we have things that we still want to make in the Long Dark, if I can call it the Long Dark One, which I don't like to do because I don't
No, but
want it to sound like it's one and two. It's really Black Frost and Long Dark. There's no really any reason why they can't coexist,
mm.
and they will coexist for, I've always said probably 2 years at least. I would like them to overlap, and so I still see us putting out significant work in the form of DLC primarily for Long Dark, but also we have some promises that we've made about things that we would include in the base game. We clearly still have work to do on fixing bugs. There's lots of quality of life things that we could still add to like improve in the game, and just continue working on it. And I think we
Mm.
want to keep doing that. We don't want to, yeah, it's a huge commitment that we've put in and lots of money that we've spent on the game, and we want to keep going with it because it's been
Mm.
successful and people still want to play it. So that's really what that message is about. We're not ready to talk
I
about
see.
specifically what the DLCs are, but we will share more information about them probably later in the year. And I think people will be excited.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice to be at this moment in the life cycle of the Long Dark because it does feel a little bit like we're a bit more free now.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
try some different things that we couldn't have tried before. And I said this, in a dev diary at some point, like it's actually going to be it's really healthy for us as a studio to be finished in quotes the Long Dark so that we can start talking about other things that we're working on
Yeah. Of
because
course.
we have been working on other things that we haven't been able to share,
Yeah.
and that's hard on the studio. It's like there's a lot of things that people are working on that they're excited about that would be nice to share with the community, but we never really could because it always came with the sort of like sentiment of like, why are you talking about things that aren't this stuff that you promised that you would make? So now we've made it, we've put it out there. It's flawed, but it's finished, and now we can start working on other things and sharing other things and keep the team energized and excited about the future as well, which is very important because they are the ones that have to make this and they have to believe in it.
Yeah. And it's well, Tails was a massive success, I think. Well, that was great,
Mhm.
and I think most people do as well. I'm sure there were some who said that they felt episode 5 got pushed back as a result. But if you're talking about content and stuff, it was great because it was well paced, added things in steps. It worked out really well. The new regions are fantastic. I love the new regions, and of course, you have the actual tales in them as well. I
Mhm.
don't know if that was great. And a lot of people have said to me, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I've, at least on my channel, gotten many people say that they would be happy to see more DLCs. So it seems to be, at least as far as I can see, people are up for that sort of thing. Depends on what it entails, free stream versus paid or whatever. But I would say Tales was pretty far balanced. The stuff that was out for free is great, and stuff that added in the paid stream, you don't need it to enjoy the long dark, but you get a extended experience, I guess you could say. And
Mhm.
yeah, so that'll be well. Anyway, we'll see how what it is, but I'd
Yeah,
be
we'll see.
excited to see
We'll
what
talk
they.
about it more like probably later in the year.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would the thing I would say about Tails is we it was a good reminder of sometimes how overly ambitious we are and how we don't always scope things as well as we should.
Mm.
Because we did really plan that as a 1 year thing, and it took us 2 years to make it.
Yeah, but
And it's because there was so much in there. And I think,
Mm.
and it's nice that people were patient about it, but the other aspect of it is like it's really inexpensive for what you get.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah, it is.
when
Yeah.
you think about it, that whole thing could have been like three DLCs instead of one.
Mm.
So we have to be a bit careful about that too, because I think we tend to undersell our own work in terms of price. We tend to put so much value in because we have this sense of like owing our community things because we haven't delivered, we haven't delivered, we haven't delivered. So no, I'm not suddenly saying we're going to suddenly charge more money for everything, but like I do think the expectations that we set with Tails in terms of price for for value is a little bit skewed. Like, and that does, I mean, it's a bigger topic, but it does relate to overall pricing and SKU structure and all kinds of things that are interesting if anybody's interested in the business of the industry. There's a lot of interesting conversations to have about that. Like when you have a base game like survival mode that's 19.99, it puts a
Mm.
cap on what you can charge for your DLC. Otherwise, psychologically, it doesn't make sense. It's like, well, the DLC is more expensive than the base game. That doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. So you have to start making all
Yeah.
these interesting choices that relate back to product design and scope and budgets and stuff that we don't usually talk that much about, but it's all important because we're an independent game studio. That's how we make our living. That's how we keep people employed. That's how we have, sustainability and longevity for our team. So we have to be careful about that, and I think that's something that we'll work on more in the future. And I'm very hopeful that you know people will um, give us that grace to make those kinds of business decisions that we need to make to keep the company in a good place.
Mm. Yeah. I'm excited to see what happens. So it'll be
Yeah,
interesting to follow. It's been a
me too.
long journey for me as well. I started playing. It's 2018. I checked around receipts, but I must have heard about 2017. So it's been a long time, and I have my series that's Road to 500 Days, where I survived 500 days. I mean, I've done that before, but this time
Hmm.
I started when there was only Tales Part One, and I had no children, and I have two children. So it's like a journey that's parallel to real life, and
Yep.
is this going to continue? And it's interesting. And I thought it's like before we start maybe wrapping up, I wanted to ask one thing, or talk about one thing, which was one thing that fascinates me about the Long Dark is the extended community of it, because uh, ignoring people having negative comments about some releases, episode 5 and that sort of stuff. If you're talking about the core regular players, because there's a difference between one-time players, with an opinion,
Hmm.
and regular players. So the regular players are extremely positive. So one thing that the Long Dark has is that the online community is extremely non-toxic, by which I refer to content creators and their community. So if you go on Twitch and you go on pretty much anyone who is a regular Long Dark streamer, they always have very nice people in chat. They're welcoming, hi, welcome in, and this and that. People
Hmm.
help each other very much. And I always thought it was this interesting sort of paradox almost, that a apocalyptic survival game where you play solo, single player, and you're the only person in it, has this community around it that's so positive, that it's, and it's, but there's no multiplayer involved, yet you have so many people coming together. And I always thought that was such a nice thing. People, there are a lot of really great people in the Long Dark, content creators, but also viewers and commenters. And I don't know, have you got any impressions of that sort of thing? Like, how, do you feel that as well on your end, or how does this for you?
Yeah, no, I do. It's funny that you mentioned that because I think I've often thought about like our multiplayer is the community
Yeah,
in
yeah,
a way.
exactly. Yes,
You know,
yeah,
like and you mentioned that too. And I think that is I think it comes from a couple places. I think the gameplay experience of the Long Dark is not competitive. You mentioned it's not multiplayer.
yes,
Like it's not it's very much a we're all in the same boat. You know, how
mm,
can we support each other to survive in this harsh, like not literally in the game, but like in sharing strategies and experiences and stuff. It's really a supportive, it's a supportive like experience to talk about the game. It's not about like, well, how far did you go? Or I'm better than you. I survived longer than you. It's not
yeah,
about that. It's about how
no,
did you do it? What are your tricks? Oh, where
mm,
should I go? How does this work? You know, I'm confused about this mechanic, or what's an optimal strategy to deal with this issue? Like, I think there's so much player sharing that goes on, and I think sometimes, you know, I do see occasionally people come in and sort of crash on the Long Dark because they feel like confused, and they'll say, why isn't there a tutorial and all this sort of thing? And it's like, well, the community is there
yeah,
because there isn't a tutorial. There's a place, the first place people go to when they're stuck is they go to your channel, they go to a forum, they go to Twitch, they go wherever, and they look for answers and they look for help. And
mm,
in looking for help, they discover other people who love the game, and then they become a community together. And that's the
yes,
whole
yeah,
idea.
mm,
The second thing I want to say is the answer to it, the answer, in my opinion, to the community, generally the community sentiment and the positivity and the supportiveness of it is Mackenzie's radio message in episode 5.
mm, yeah. We always, all we have
Take
is
care of
each
each
other.
other.
Yeah,
All we have is each other,
mm,
right? That's
mm,
why that's really like that is probably, I probably shouldn't say this, but that sort of monologue is probably the most important thing
mm,
in any part of Wintermute is
yeah,
that message. And I hope that's the message that people take away from the story and the game and their experience of Long Dark and their experience of being part of the community with each other. Like that's the part that means the most to us is what you're talking about, how the community kind of comes together. And it
mm,
doesn't, and it, unfortunately, it doesn't always come together in the places that we can see it or the ways in which
no,
we can interact with it, right? And I think there's a lot of different reasons for that that don't really have anything to do with the game or the community, but have to do with systems like how Steam works and how Reddit works and et cetera, that kind of encourage a certain kind of behavior that is not always healthy.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I think the thing that means the most to us as a team that's making this game is when we see positive interactions with our
mm,
between our players,
yeah,
and when we hear from our players about how much the game has helped them in some way, it's been meaningful to them in some way, whether it was helping them to get through a tough time in their life,
yeah,
or as you said, we hear stories about, you know, we got a lot of these letters from like emails from players, even when we shipped episode 5, and because it's sort of some sense of a conclusion sometimes comes from that, and we heard from a lot of people sharing their stories about like sort of what you've talked about too. Like I started playing this when I was a teenager. Now I have my own family. Like
Yeah.
I've gone through all these experiences in my life, and the game has been part of that in some way all the way through. And it's like that's the part that matters the most to us. Like
Mm.
it's great to have sales and lots of players and hopefully critical success if you can get it and all those other things. But like the reason why we do this is so that we can recognize and see that our players that our work affects people in a certain way.
Mm.
And I think the game itself has certain values built into it in the way it looks, the art style, the way it plays, the way the narrative, the tone of the narrative, the way we describe things, the names of regions, like the music,
Yeah.
everything in the game is telling you something about the values of the people who make the game and something about the studio. And so, yeah, I think that's so I don't want to say take it for granted. Like I'm so grateful that there's a positive, supportive community around the game, and I think there's a supportive community around the game because of what the game is. I think if the game was like Call of Duty or some like super competitive, toxic, like Tarkov kind of type
Oh,
experience or
yeah.
whatever, you probably would get a very different group of people playing it with a very different way of interacting with each other. Which
Yeah.
isn't to say those games don't have good communities. It's just different. It's like people who love the long dark are a certain kind of person,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we're so lucky, that
Yeah.
that's that kind of person. We've found enough of them, and they've found each other. That's one of the best things about the game.
It is great, and it's a very positive community. It's the main reason I started at all because I now that my channel is big, I use it often as a platform to promote smaller content creators. But when I started
That's
out,
good.
the first year, I was just a viewer. I would watch people stream it, Kimi Ota, Finan, and all those people. And then I thought,
Hmm.
I'm gonna try and stream it myself. And because at that point I had already been a viewer for a year, and people knew me because when you talk in chat, it's not like some other games with thousands of views. You don't see the chat. Most people who stream long dark have between 10 and 200 viewers or something like that. So people
Hmm.
read and interact. So when I started streaming, and everyone says, "Oh, did you hear Saki started streaming? Go over there and follow." So I became like affiliate, like immediately, right? And you
Hmm.
get all the same people coming in, and then you start chatting, and everyone's supporting each other, and you rate each other. So, and there was never any negative comments. Like most people I know that they ban like one player a year or something like that.
Hmm.
It's really in the regular, long-standing community of the Long Dark, the including content creators and the viewers are extremely positive. They're very mature. They're very supportive of each other and have a good heart, as grandmother says.
Hmm.
So that's something that also adds, at least to me, a lot of value to the game. It sort of adds a whole new world beyond the world itself that makes it extra enjoyable because you can share experiences. So like you said, you can learn as if the community was a tutorial almost. And people are extremely positive. I mean, take Randall for whenever you go into his Twitch, he's like, "Hi, great to see you. How is your
Yeah.
day going? And it's great. It's now a lot of communities are not like that. Especially multiplayer games. So this is
Hmm.
that's one aspect that is kind of like almost an invisible aspect of it. If you don't know that, if you don't know the community, you don't see it either. But if you are in it, the Long Dark has created something beyond a gameplay experience, which is a really fantastic online community. I would drop names, but then I will forget some,
Yeah.
so it's not
Yeah.
fair. you know?
No. No, I
Yeah,
mean, you're 100% right. I agree with you on all of that. And, it is, yeah, it's good to know they're out there.
yeah,
I know, I think the danger for us, and again, this goes back to something I said at the very beginning, and I'm going to choose my words very carefully, and I'm not trying to invalidate any criticism or anything that exists around any of our work, but like, you do get a distorted sometimes sense of how people are feeling about your work
mm,
if you only hear from certain loud people. And
right,
I think one of the things that I've learned from making like working on the Long Dark and having, seen community interactions and being in that world and is I go out of my way now when I experience something that I really enjoy, I go out of my way to tell the person that made it that I really enjoyed
mm,
it. I
Yeah,
think
like you did with
that
me in the
like I did
beginning.
with you. Yeah, exactly. Like because I think you need to hear everybody needs to know that and it's interesting and maybe you have some insights into this as well, but there is this notion that like you tend to hear more from people that are unhappy than you hear from who are
Yeah,
happy.
that's right.
And when you as someone who creates things are just hearing a lot of unhappy voices, and especially if you're someone like me who you're I'm the kind of person that if 100 people, if I talk to 100 people and 99 of them say something positive and one person says something negative,
Mm,
I just end up being influenced more by the negative thing than the 99 positive. That's just the way my brain works
that's
about
very
stuff.
common,
So,
I think.
well, yeah, but I think it's so, especially in this environment that we exist in. And when I say we, I don't just mean like I mean anybody who creates anything, whether it's a game, whether it's YouTube videos, if you're writing novels, if you're an artist, if you're a musician, filmmaker, whatever it is, we're already in a world that is very hostile to the things that we're trying to make and
Mm,
share. There's a lot of like there's review culture that's really pushing
right.
against people. Like that's why you see people hiding more because they don't want to be exposed to the negativity. You've got,
Mm.
not going to get on my AI bandwagon, but like you've got large scale,
Yeah.
super well financed companies that are like stealing everything they can, trying to displace creative people. You've got so many forces like pushing against creators of all kinds, and I think the if all we can do is give one positive review or one positive comment, even if it's private to someone, that can make a huge difference to people. That could be the difference between someone quitting their art and someone continuing.
Yeah,
It
that's
could be
true.
that one comment, and I just try to think about that. I think about that for other people's work. I think maybe I'm the one today that will be the reason why that person keeps going.
Yeah. Well,
And I think
that's
if
a
everybody thought that, I think we would be in a slightly different looking world right now.
well, that's a great attitude, and I would say you should definitely keep going. That's for sure.
I'll
That's for sure.
try. I'll try to keep going.
Before
Yeah.
we wrap it up, is there anything you would like to say before we call this? Anything you'd like to share?
No, I mean this has been really fun, and
Yeah,
I
that's
and
been.
I really appreciate you, wanting to talk about the game and this is a like a hard time for us right now, just navigating the post-launch stuff, but like also there's a huge amount of excitement on the team about the future. I just want everyone that watches your channel to know how much we appreciate them. That doesn't mean we only appreciate the people who like our work, but we especially appreciate the people who do. And
Yeah.
we are doing our best, and we are like always grateful for the support that we have from people like you or any of our players. And we're going to keep going.
Yeah.
And we're always, I just we're always trying to be better. And I hope that message comes through. Sometimes I think that I'm quite protective of the team and our work, and sometimes I like speak forcefully about that to people, and they have like strange opinions about what I believe or who I am, and it doesn't always come across with humility, and maybe it doesn't always have humility, but like I want people to understand how much we care about what we do, and um yeah, how much goes into it, and we don't take any of it for granted, and um everybody at Hinterland just cares so much, and I think that hopefully that comes through, but if it
Yeah.
doesn't, I want people to understand that.
Okay. Well, thank you
Okay,
so much for being here. It was great chatting to you, and I wish you all the best in the future
thank you.
development of both the Long Dark, but also Hinterland in general. Thank you for taking the time to be
Thank
here.
you, Zach. Thank you. Well, let's do it again soon.
Yeah, let's do
All
that.
right,
Thank you.
take care.